Hello. Today I'm going to be reading more from Everything Below the Waist by Jennifer Block, and it is my right as an American, thanks to the Copyright Act of 1976, to read this out loud, and I am not infringing upon copyright because I'm adding commentary. And if you cut me off YouTube, you're actually breaking the law, so don't fucking do that. I have already read some from this book before. Sorry it's taken me so long to read more. But let's get to it. Fertility insurance. A handful of sperm are swimming across the screen in no particular direction. A sharp pen-like device enters the screen from the right. I'm standing a few steps behind Adrian Reng, an embryologist at the Institute for Reproductive Medicine and Science at St. Barnabas Medical Center in Livingston, New Jersey, watching the modern miracle of in vitro fertilization. Reng has her right hand on a joystick and left on a dial. She eyes her target, one out of maybe 5 swimmers, though I'm not yet sure how she sets them apart, and takes a jab. She just disabled it, John Garisi, the lab director, explains. She breaks it? I ask, somewhat startled. It does break the tail, but it's okay, because the tail is unnecessary and because we're going to perform the function of the tail. The tool she's using is actually a needle the width of a human hair with an even finer tip. Reng sucks the finless swimmer into the needle's chamber with the dial. She repeats this on 4 more screens, each with just a few sperm spread out, choosing, striking, and collecting 4 more sperm into the same needle. She's lining them up in the tool, Garisi says. She then rotates the drop under the microscope, bringing her next target into view, the egg, so large that it just fits on the screen. What we're doing right now is working against the clock, says Garisi. Those eggs are very sensitive to pH, temperature, and they're not the best environment, and they're in not the best environment right now. They belong in the incubator. Jennifer Block, there's an editing error on this page 52. You meant to say TYTHEY''re. Anyway, they're in not the best environment right now. They belong in the incubator, so she's working to get them back as soon as possible. The eggs are so sensitive to their environment, I'm told, that my very presence may be having an effect. Earlier that day, I suited up in a blue paper bunny suit and hairnet in the locker room with Serena Chen, a reproductive endocrinologist and director of reproductive medicine at St. Barnabas, who set up the lab visit. I asked if this was what the partners wear. You know, we do not let them in, said Chen. They get a picture of the embryo being transferred that day, and they're told to positively visualize in the waiting room. The less people we have in the lab, the better it is for the embryos. A medical resident is with us as well, but only because of my visit. We hardly ever give tours, I'm told. I try to send good energy to the eggs. Energy matters, says Chen. This particular egg has a nice shape, all agree. Spherical, with a billowy cloud around it. I want to keep watching, but Garisi draws my attention to the island in the middle of the smallish lab. It's not much bigger than a modern kitchen, with many beige, fridge-like appliances decorated with multicolored labels. He wants to explain the egg's role in physiological conception so I can appreciate the embryologist's role in the dish. Wearing a black surgeon's cap and teal scrubs, he has the aura of a judo master, soft-spoken, looks you in the eye, confident and kind. He grabs a paper and pen, draws a circle with the ring around it. The cloud surrounding the egg is the zona pellicida, he explains, and in a physiological conception, it serves as the gatekeeper through which just one sperm will ultimately pass a complex molecular event. The zona pellicida is sticky. Each sperm head has a special sauce of enzymes that are released upon encounter with it, and the sperm with the best sauce and swimming action will essentially digest its way through the zona pellicida. The sperm that makes it through will then touch the egg membrane itself, which causes an electrical reaction. Calcium ions go out. The electrical pulse spreads in either direction, says Garisi. The egg will respond by opening what's called the pervitelline space, a kind of foyer between the egg's front door and the egg itself. Once this happens, the egg hardens its outer gate, he says, essentially closing the door to any more suitors. If more than one sperm happen to breach the zona pellicida at once, the runners up will be locked in the foyer. In 2014, researchers at Northwestern University observed that millions of zinc atoms are released at this point in a display that looks just like tiny fireworks and lasts about 2 hours after fertilization, as one report put it. So reproduction really requires electricity and movement. In physiological conception, only around 100 sperm out of tens, perhaps hundreds of millions, complete the journey through the cervix up into the uterus, down into the fallopian tube, to meet the egg soon after it's released from the ovary. Think about this. 100 out of 100 million is just 0.0001%. That means various mechanisms are in place so that's not a pylon. The biology of conception has launched 1,000 metaphors of sperm racing to the finish line, competing for first place, vying for the prize, the trophy, and others. And if not sports comparisons, it's military metaphors. Sperm become missiles, warheads. But the biological reality is that the female body is actively guiding and selecting at every stage of the journey. The substance, at least, is interesting as semen is the fertile cervical mucus, as Eric Odeblad studied, which the cervix produces in the days leading up to ovulation. It plays an essential role in conception. It washes the sperm of its seminal carrier fluid, which the egg wants none of, traps sperm that are misshapen or slow, carries the ideal candidates up the molecular strands, and even preserve choice candidates in the cervix's crypts to keep them alive with sugars and carbohydrates. Some 70% of the sperm don't make it past this point. Their population is further reduced at the velvet rope entrance of the fallopian tube, which bounces even more. Basically, the fastest sperm don't fertilize the egg because they are immature. Scott Gilbert, professor of biology at Swarthmore College and author of many papers and chapters on the subject, explains. Rather, the sperm spend hours or days being matured by cells inside a fallopian tube. It's called capacitation. The cells initiate chemical reactions that change the sperm's membrane, allowing the sperm to sense the presence of the egg and to travel toward it and to fuse with the egg cell once it finds it. There is cooperation between the sperm cells and the mother of the baby. To his credit, Gilbert co-authored a paper critical of sexist metaphors in 1989, pointing out that scientists knew of the female's role starting in the 1950s. The egg, once released, signals its arrival, possibly with progesterone carried from the ovary in its cumulus cells, which hyperactivates the sperm, allowing them to detach, finally turning them into the Olympic swimmers of their mythology. Perhaps then and only then is it really a race to the finish line. Still, the sperm must navigate the cloud of cumulus cells to even reach the zona pellicida. Assisted reproductive technology mimics... Oh my gosh! You need to stop it. That was outrageous. Stop. You can come sit with me. You cannot bark like that. Come here. No barking like that. Come here. Come on up. Stop. We do not bark like that. Cut it out. Assisted reproductive technology mimics or obviates many of these mechanisms. Millions of sperm, hopefully, are collected, washed with a synthetic mucus-like compound, and filtered. In IVF, the sperm that make the cut, ideally more than 1,000, are matured in a special medium mimicking capacitation. Then they are deposited directly into other into their single cell made in waiting, somewhat of a pylon. To see it, it's interesting because they're all stuck. They've all got beating tails and they're spinning the egg, says Garisi. He likens the sperm's action on the egg to a bunch of dogs playing with a beach ball. In intrauterine insemination, or IUI, which requires a sperm tally in the millions, pre-washed sperm are brought past the cervix and cervical fluid directly into the uterus. Still, the remainder of the choosing and capacitating is done by the egg and its allies as it would be after intercourse. What I'm about to watch on screen will skip all of that because Reng is about to inject a single sperm directly past the egg's protective zona, right into the center of the egg itself. This is what Garisi meant when he said, "We are going to perform the function of the tail." Though that's not even, the half of it, in intracytoplasmic sperm injection, or ICSI. ICSI. The embryologist does the selecting and initiates the movement. She opens the electrified door by mechanical means. Rang positions the egg, which has been denuded of its cumulus, with a pipette on the left holding it in place while she lines up the sperm-loaded needle on the right. Slow and steady, the needle is poking the egg, a triangular fold revealing the pressure. Garisi pokes his own scrub with a pen to help me visualize what I'm seeing in 2 dimensions. We need to break the membrane in order to deposit the sperm inside. When you just poke it like that, it actually doesn't break, it just gives, he says. The sperm is a visible dot on the needle, and as the needle is poking, the sperm looks as if it's retreating, trying to swim away from its fate. Though that's not actually what's happening because it can no longer swim. She's pulling back the suction in order to break the zona pellicula, explains Garisi. Sucking it past the sharp needle is what breaks it. Something too subtle for me to notice tells the embryologist that the membrane is broken, and propulsion sends the sperm right into the egg's middle. Rang then retracts the needle, the sperm waiting near the tip. She rotates the drop, bringing another round egg into focus, and repeats the process under a minute. So what happens now is the egg becomes activated by the process of the stick, says Garisi. Normally, the electrical impulse will initiate egg activation, but it turns out the physical stick will do the same thing. So now the egg knows it's been fertilized. If all goes well, Garisi explains, the sperm's nucleus will soon transform into a pronucleus. Then the 2 pronuclei will fuse, and the fertilized single-cell egg will divide into 2, then 4, then 8, and by day 5 it will be a roughly 60-cell blastocyst. Safer sex? ? For millions of parents worldwide each year, this laboratory, or one like it, is the bedroom in which their child was conceived. For women, assisted reproductive technologies offer an extension on the biological clock, a technological workaround, especially for those who've devoted their 20s and 30s to building a career. ICSI with fresh eggs. Forgot what ICSI. Keep forgetting what ICSI stands for. Intracytoplasmic sperm injection. ICSI. ICSI with fresh eggs. ICSI with fresh eggs, with frozen eggs, with donor eggs, is the most high-tech workaround possible, and it is the method used for about 3/4 of all cycles in the United States. For about 10% of cycles, the micromanipulation of the cells does not end there. More and more clinics are offering pre-implantation genetic screening and diagnosis, PGS and PGD, in which an embryologist biopsies a days-old blastocyst, removes one of those 60 or so cells, and inspects it for all 46 chromosomes. They can even look for markers for a handful of horrible fatal diseases like cystic fibrosis, Tay-Sachs, and Huntington's. Garisi leads us to a smaller adjacent room with 4 human-sized stainless steel thermoses, freezers full of eggs and embryos. He opens one, and like a theatrical cauldron, fog spills over. After biopsy, he freezes the cleared embryos. If a clinic is offering biopsy without this technology, they're doing a disservice to the patient, he says. Wow. Okay. This allows us to transfer one embryo at a time, which allows them to prevent twins, which ups the overall success rate. The way Chen explains it to her patients is that 2 transferred at the same time is a 75% pregnancy rate, and 2 embryos in 2 separate transfers has an overall 90% chance of pregnancy. PGD testing began as a way for couples with grave genetic inheritances to ensure that they didn't pass on a disease or go through an abortion following prenatal testing. But more and more, it's just another step in the reproductive technology process after you've already come so far. I feel like a lot of patients who we have right now are high risk. They say, why would I ever transfer an untested embryo after everything I've been through? Chen says. A few weeks after we meet, She'll participate on a panel at the famed 92nd Street Y in New York City called The End of Sex, along with Stanford bioethicist Henry Greeley, author of the book by the same name, and they'll seriously consider the possibility that in the not-too-distant future, even fertile heterosexual couples will prefer needle pipette conception over skin-to-skin. People will say, well, it's much safer and much more cost-effective to get pregnant this way than any other way, she says. Can't wait to talk about this later. Her point is that, theoretically, the screening technology will reduce the risk of miscarriage and birth defects. Greeley argues the technology is already here. If we can do that, why would you take those risks? Then sex becomes a little bit of a reproductive Russian roulette, says Chen. This, of course, presumes so many things. For one, that miscarriage is worse than miscarriage is worse an ordeal than IVF, neither of which I have ever heard any women call a picnic. In order for the embryologist to have eggs to work with, those eggs need to be harvested from a woman. An editing error here, Jennifer Block. From a woman, not from a human, because only women produce eggs. Duh. From a woman who must take ovary-stimulating hormone injections for weeks prior, travel to the clinic for multiple transvaginal ultrasounds to check on progress, and then return to have a needle threaded through her vagina into her ovary under anesthesia to extract eggs from each follicle. Then another visit for the embryo's insertion, more hormones, and waiting in hopes of a pregnancy, and not another cycle. The other big problem with the why risk sex argument is that it presumes that we all know the risks of these procedures and micromanipulations, which we don't. IVF has been in wide use for 30 years, ICSI for 15. Studies in the long-term outcomes of all are scarce. Biopsy is still experimental, according to the American Society for Reproductive Medicine. While some studies have detected no problems in toddlers who were biopsied as embryos, others have detected neurodevelopmental abnormalities in areas such as fine and large motor function and muscle tone. And of course, there is no long-term evidence yet these children aren't old enough to reproduce. In 2012, Michelle Labonte, then a biologist at Wellesley College, now at Harvard, surveyed the websites of more than 250 fertility clinics offering the test. Nearly 80% did not mention risks at all, and 2/3 of those that did still said the procedure was safe regardless. In a piece she wrote for the Journal of Medical Ethics, she raises the possibility that PGD is being oversold, the same way amniocentesis was assumed safe until studies showed that it increased risk of miscarriage. We make this mistake not infrequently with new medical technology, especially in OBGYN. For a long time, cesarean sections were thought to be safer for the baby, but then it turned out bypassing vaginal birth raises the risk for asthma, obesity, and a host of other conditions nobody could have ever imagined until there was long-term data to show a connection. Well, you could have fucking figured it out, because it's not that hard. Not that those are the risks, but it's obviously better to be born vaginally, because that's how you're supposed to be born, fucking duh. And, not cut a woman open. Idiots. Okay. We think we can do it better than nature, and then nature says, I told you so. Thank you, Jennifer Block. Studies show that babies conceived with assisted reproductive technology, ART, either IVF or ICSI, have roughly doubled the rate of birth defects, even among singletons who are not premature. Twins categorically have worse outcomes, and while there has been a definite movement over the past decade among fertility clinics towards single embryo transfers, twins still account for 1/4 of technologically assisted pregnancies in the United States. There is a gap in our knowledge about the long-term outcomes of ART, says Judith Stern, a professor of obstetrics and gynecology at Dartmouth Geisel School of Medicine. We've been doing this for well over 30 years at this point, and about 15 years ago, we started realizing that there really were adverse outcomes. Wow. At least in this short term for babies. These include low birth weight, increased risk of prematurity, and possibly birth defects. That said, she and a team of researchers in Boston are finding that it's difficult to separate effects of ART from the effects of infertility. In other words, the poor outcomes in babies may have no more to do with the biological fitness of the parents than the technology per se. But we really don't know anything about the long-term effects not only in the kids, but on women who undergo treatment. She says, there are lingering questions about links to cancer, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. All these concerns apply to egg donors as well, and to women now sold on the promise of egg freezing who are essentially donating eggs to their future selves. Donors have even less research to go on because the only studies of long-term risks like breast and ovarian cancer are in women undergoing IVF, and those studies are inconclusive. Infertility itself is associated with higher risk of cancer, whereas egg donors tend to be healthy. As some research and advocates argue, the clear and ethical solution to extrapolating from infertile women is to actually carry out long-term studies of egg donors, which no one has done. Neither Chen nor Garisi show much concern about risks. Nothing I do is anywhere near as risky as the process of pregnancy and delivery, Chen likes to say, yet she does tell me about the dish effect, which points to some added risks for IVF ICSI babies. The more obvious sign of a dish effect is the rate at which dish embryos cleave into identical twins. It is 4 times the rate of natural twinning, 2% versus 0.5%. These are very high risk and have a higher rate of birth defects, Chen tells me. The fact that we make more of them with IVF, it has to be the dish effect. No shit, Sherlock. I asked Garisi what the risk is to human embryo, removing 1/60th of its minuscule form. Virtually zero, he says. I wish I could say that in a stupid man voice. Virtually zero, he says. Yeah, but that's for him. It's not for everybody, Chen interjects. If it were that easy, every fertility clinic around the country would be offering it. But it takes tremendous skill, coordination, and hours of clinician time. Patients come to me all the time and say, my doctor said PGD would not be good for me. And I'm like, well, yeah, because you're at a program where the lab is not comfortable doing PGD. They don't have the skill or experience to feel comfortable and make the benefits outweigh the risks, because there are risks. You're doing microsurgery on the embryo. If it's someone with decades of experience doing it, she nods at Garisi, he can say zero, but it's not really zero. She cites a large Dutch study in which they killed 6% of their embryos. ICSI originally developed as a way for men with too few sperm to genetically father a child, what's called male factor in the biz. The technology can help a man who's diagnosed as azoospermic, having a semen sperm count of 0. As long as a surgeon can extract a single sperm from within his testes, fertilization could happen. But ICSI may also have driven its ascendance. That is because the egg denuding process became irresistible for embryologists simply preferring an IVF. For the eggs to be easily penetrated in ICSI, an embryologist must remove the outer cumulus cells. To do this, they stuck an egg into a needle and propel it out in various medium solutions. Rinse and repeat, until the zona pellicida is the only barrier remaining. It seemed logical that by stripping the egg, they could better tell whether it was mature, ready for union. So embryologists began denuding eggs en masse. What they didn't realize, and many not still, because nothing is standardized in fertility medicine. Nothing is standardized in fertility medicine. Nothing. Is that the act of stripping makes fertilization in IVF less likely. Scott Gilbert has an explanation. The cumulus cells are what hyperactivate the sperm, better enabling one to fuse with the eggs. If this removal of the cumulus is as widespread as some experts suspect, it has caused a lot of additional cycles for the women from whom the eggs were extracted, and it has accelerated the use of ICSI. See, here she says women, but a few pages ago she said the human from whom you're extracting the eggs. Maybe you should become radical, Jennifer Block. Anyway. Today, ICSI's use has far outpaced male factor in infertility. Even the St. Barnabas Center, which considers itself conservative in this regard, performed ICSI procedures for 4 clients and IVF for the one day I was there. Everyone seems to prefer it. If you see an embryo that has been fertilized after routine IVF, it's like a minefield. There's just little loser sperm all over. They've got their little faces stuck in the outside and he has to dodge around them, says Chen, referring to Garisi if he's doing an embryonic biopsy. Loser sperm can complicate the result. Our guideline is a very low threshold for ICSI, Girisi echoes. If the sperm is normal, we do IVF. If there's any doubt whatsoever, we'll do ICSI. If we're doing genetic testing, we do ICSI. If we have unexplained infertility, we do half ICSI. In short, ICSI is the answer when there's any question. There's little downside to doing the ICSI for a patient who doesn't need it, he says, except what if there is? And would it be possible to treat male factor by treating men? The male factor. One interesting thing about sperm is their sheer numbers. If you look at the process of the body making sperm, it's the rapid division of new cells. It's a mark in your cellular health, says Sarah Knob. One of about 25 sperm nerds in the country explains to me, a typical man is making 1,500 sperm in a second, every second. They're cranking out sperm, so these are rapidly, constantly dividing cells. Very few cells in the body do that. The only other cells that divide that fast are cancer cells, which is why cancer treatments are so deadly to infertility. And hair follicles, also rapidly dividing cells. Thus, a man's ability to produce precocious sperm is a measure of health. Knob has become an expert in this field, not as an academic, but as an entrepreneur. She and her husband launched Track, the first FDA-approved at-home sperm counting device. She wants men to take more of an interest in their health and in sperm count as the vehicle. Diabetes, heart disease, obesity, anything that happens to your body will impact those rapidly dividing cells. They need oxygen. They need all those nutrients. Alcohol, drugs, and smoking can lower counts. So can antidepressant, pesticides, antibiotic, and perhaps surprisingly testosterone treatment, though you wouldn't learn that from a low T campaign. Hardcore cyclists can have misshapen sperm. A friend's husband fixed this completely by switching to a butt pad seat. Men can also have hormonal imbalances, and that's a major cause of infertility, just like women, says Knob. For women, high levels of sugar in the diet can lead to problems. It's the same in men. One problem with high glycemic diet is the surplus of aromatase, which causes too much testosterone to convert to estrogen. At Boston University, a couples study called PRESTO found that even 1 can of sugary soda a day reduced fertility by 1/3 in men and 1/4 in women, explains Lauren Wise, one of the researchers. Wow. Energy drinks had an even greater impact. Sperm can also take a hit on the storage side after perfect production. They have a very narrow comfort zone, temperature-wise, which is why the testes hang outside the body. But skinny jeans, a laptop, bike shorts, you could have a low count because you're cooking your balls, says Nab. This phrasing is actually why we met at a conference called Fertility Planet, tagline, everything you need to create your family. I was taking a last pass through a hallway of vendors displaying things like growth medium, egg freezing machines, and a DIY inseminator wand called the Stork. Then I saw the shot glasses. Don't cook your balls, they instructed. Knob handed me one and showed me her device, a mini centrifuge that resembles a squat coffee grinder. She was the only one, vendor, speaker, or otherwise, who said anything about male fertility. The gadget fit in her palm, a round slate gray plastic case powered by 2 AA batteries. She called that part the engine. A droplet-sized sample goes into the pupil-like center of the prop, a dark, slender blade that snaps into the engine, where it spins at about 6,500 rotations per minute for 6.5 minutes under the locked lucite lid. The spinning basically accelerates gravity, separating out the sperm cells, the densest cells in the body, she tells me, which are then driven into a clear chamber, creating a visible pellet along a ruler that indicates the count. It's essentially a miniature, portable, user-friendly version from the Centrifuge Professional Labs to use the separate red blood cells from plasma. Knob's husband, an engineer, patented the technology with a partner, and the three decided to launch their own company, but they were not yet sure which bodily fluid the device would test or for what. We started talking about fertility and men's fertility. I said, is this even a thing? Knob had dealt with her own fertility problems when the couple decided to start a family. Now they are juggling 4 kids in the startup. I thought, do men have fertility problems? It didn't even register on my brain. So Knob, who has a degree in library science, started researching and talking to experts, and she applied some logic. Of course, men must have fertility problems. In fact, research suggests they account for about half of all infertility. But people are not doing research because IVF is basically a cure. One of those experts, Paul Turek, a California-based urologist, has the same mixed feelings about IVF. For the chance it gives men who had, say, survived cancer to father a child, 3 cheers, he tells me, but IVF also was a terrible thing for men's health because it has shuttled men who are infertile straight to IVF, and what has been forsaken in that shuttling is the opportunity to take care of them because it has become very clear that fertility is a biomarker of health. In 2009, Turek and a team published a study connecting low sperm count to increased cancer risk. That was incredibly earth-shaking basic science research, he said. In 2016, he participated in meetings at the NIH devoted to the subject of male fertility, whether it is declining worldwide, which some studies suggest, and what that reveals about men's health. In general, however, the focus of fertility clinics is women, and it's their bodies that the treatment is delivered. Treatment. After all, reproductive endocrinologists are OBGYNs who went through an extra fellowship, likely at a fertility center. In the United States, they number around 3,000, while there are 200 or 300 urologists with training in men's hormones and fertility, says Turek. Male infertility is also not recognized as a subspecialty. There's no board certification like there is for reproductive endocrinologists, says Knob. A general urology clinic is not going to have someone really versed in fertility. Most of them will know the plumbing. They're surgeons, so they're good with plumbing, but not good at understanding hormonal imbalances. That is to say, they are not looking at sperm count as a vital sign. It is just a fact. When I see a man in the office with fertility problems who has boutique practices where patients pay out of pocket in LA and San Francisco, I give him a 200 question questionnaire. I ask a lot of questions about what he eats, his lifestyle, and what his stresses are. People say the 5th vital sign is pain. No more. My 5th vital sign is waist circumference. Turek also screens for Y chromosome deletion, a relatively recent blood test, and other physical and genetic factors, but most men aren't given this kind of attention. He tells me about one study that found just 18 to 20% of infertile men in the United States get a urologic evaluation for the diagnosis of infertility, which means that 100% are getting a semen analysis, but 80% don't get any care, says Turek. This assumption that low sperm counts just are, they can't be fixed, is entrenched in medicine. I came to this field when half of infertility was unexplained, and that has carried through 2 generations, he says. The gynecologists happen to have perfect technology for things you can't fix, which is IVF. It's a cultural problem, not an individual problem, so I've been trying to teach gynecologists that semen analysis is a biomarker of health, and maybe the first referral is to a specialist to get the guy checked out. Why did I keep putting the top on my pen? Turk says in European countries with nationalized health care, this is the norm because it's cheaper. It's cheaper for the system to evaluate the man first. It's 1/10 the price of evaluating the woman. It's a win-win. Plus, it might save the woman needless procedures, I point out, and maybe make a healthier baby as well. Yeah, it's a win-win-win-win, he says. For example, one common little-known problem for men is called varicocele. These are dilated veins in the scrotum that heat up the testicles, cooking those balls, Turek explains, and they account for 35 to 40% of primary fertility in men. It's just an anatomical problem of blood going the wrong way, says Turek, something that started happening to humanoids around the time we stood up, something that happens to guys around puberty, often the fit, active ones. Typically, a man with unknown varicocele will present with a low sperm count, unexplained, and his partner will be recommended for IUI. Turek's team crunched the numbers and found that surgical repair for varicocele is about the same cost as 3 rounds of IUI. If the sperm count is low enough to recommend IVF, then varicocele repair is cheaper hands down than IVF, he says, and that's assuming the 3 cycles, 3 months of injections, ultrasounds, and procedures for the woman. Repairing that vein, on the other hand, takes 1 hour. Recovery is a day or 2 in the couch and some Vicodin. Staring at Knob's device on the conference hall, it struck me that it resembles a classic It resembles the classic hard plastic pack of birth control pills, and this idea that men have systems that need regular checking, that they have an equal share of fertility issues, that they could simply quit soda or switch to cargo pants or have a minor surgery and save their partners hours upon hours of invasive needles and ultrasound wands, risks of hormone exposures, and the dish effect. This may be as revolutionary as the pill. Okay. And to Turek's point that IVF is not really healthcare in the traditional sense of the word, but rather a technological fix that it shunts men from actual care. Why wouldn't this hold true for women as well? 2 days before Holly, who wanted us to use her first name only, was scheduled for her first intrauterine insemination, Snowzilla clawed its way from Northern Virginia to New York City. On Sunday, 23rd January 6, 2016, Holly's home of Reston, Virginia was under 29 inches of snow. The clinic had stationed doctors in nearby hotels so none of its patients would have to forego a cycle come Monday. As the storm subsided, Holly and her husband actually heard the welcome sounds of a city plow, but it didn't come all the way down to their cul-de-sac. So the day before her 9 a.m. appointment, Holly spent 6 hours digging out their driveway, coaxing her husband to help for a part of the day, though he wanted to just reschedule. Not Holly. She had put in her time for this date. Given the diagnosis of unexplained infertility at age 32, she was not going to let Mother Nature give her any more grief. She woke up before dawn the next morning and shoveled for another 2 hours. In preparation for the insemination, she had endured every side effect they listed, and then some. From the drug Clomid, she'd gone back and forth to the clinic 24 miles away at least 5 times for vaginal ultrasounds to check on the follicles. Then she took the trigger shot of the hormone HCG, which prompts ovulation. In Holly, it triggered more. It's pretty terrible. I lose my shit just pumping those hormones into my body. I cry. I get lightheaded. Really emotional. For all of her 20s, Holly hadn't even wanted kids, but then one day around the time she turned 30, something in her switched. Like many women, she went off the pill and started casually trying. For the first year, we weren't necessarily in a hurry. So we just lived our lives as normal, but knowing the conventional wisdom that a year without birth control or a pregnancy can mean infertility, she went to her OBGYN to ask some questions. For women over 35, the conventional wisdom on that window is 6 months. Her doctor performed her, hysterosalpingogram, which confirmed her fallopian tubes were clear. They took blood to check her hormone levels, all within range. Even though her periods were a bit irregular, she appeared to be ovulating. She had been checking herself with a store-bought kit for several months. Her OB also looked at something many do not. She tested Holly's husband's sperm count. It was a little low. Even though Holly looked fine and her husband's count signaled that it could be the problem, her doctor suggested she take Clomid. It was terrible. I had nausea, hot flashes, nightmares, paranoia. I started mixing up my left and right. I was bloated and I had an upset stomach, she told me. She quit after a month. She also stopped seeing her doctor, the only OBGYN she'd ever gone to. I don't know if I trusted her. I just feel like she didn't answer my questions. I would say, why isn't my period regular? And she would say, I don't know, maybe you should go see a specialist, said Holly. Well, that's actually what you're supposed to do as a doctor. Another year went by, and she found a new OBGYN who was well-rated. She was really lovely, and she had us do tests again because it had been more than a year. Again, Holly's tests came back fine. Her husband didn't want another sperm count, so they put it off. When Holly told the new doctor that her periods were irregular, the doctor also suggested Clomid. I told her about the side effects, but she asked me to try again. She said this is really the next step. Holly did 2 more cycles under her care. Clomid is typically taken on days 3 through 7 of the menstrual cycle, which one day being the first day of a period. So the day you get your period, you call the clinic and tell them today is day 1. Holly told me then on day 3, blood work and vaginal ultrasound in the office, then 5 days of Clomid. I had hot flashes those 5 days, along with the laundry list, she said. And I was super emotional. How could I forget that one? It was to the point where for a week I could cry about every day about something. I would say, I'm so sorry, I don't know why I'm crying. It's the Clomid. Since her doctor had recommended this as a remedy for the irregular period, which made it difficult to tell when the ovulation would occur, Holly just assumed that Clomid was going to make me ovulate on time, so she and her husband followed the rule to have sex every other day starting on day 12, but I was probably ovulating later, and it turned out I was traveling on the days when I was ovulating. The second month back on Clomid, she had to travel to Turkey for work. There was nights when I was completely drenched and I would have to take off all my clothes. The whole plane ride back, I was having hot flashes. Jesus Christ. That's outrageous. This is when her doctor labeled her with unexplained infertility. This diagnosis, which typically portends invasive medical procedures, is not defined by test results or symptoms, but rather by time and math. Let's say you have a couple who has not conceived for 1 year. Statistically, their per-cycle pregnancy rate drops from 15 to 20% down to 1 or 2% per month, says Serena Chen, the fertility specialist in New Jersey. In other words, the label is really more of a prognostication than a diagnosis, and the decision to treat is theoretically a gamble with better odds. It's playing the numbers game, says Chen. We're not treating people who are sterile. We were just treating people who have suboptimal fertility. Often people could get pregnant on their own, and what we're trying to do is shorten the time to conceive. If that hypothetical couple who hasn't conceived for a year were to try for another year on their own, they'd have a 30% chance of conceiving at some point. But with Clomid IUI, we can get a 10 to 12% rate per month, thus a 32% rate in 3 months. With IVF, you can go significantly higher, she says Chen. So both are shortening the time to conceive and increasing the per-cycle pregnancy rate. For her part, Chen is focused on the health of her patients as well as making babies, which she said was not part of her training. Something I really enjoy about what I do is that even if we don't do all these high-tech treatments, we improve their lives and educate them about their body, their health. Sure you do. And because this process is so stressful, the idea of becoming healthy is really empowering a lot of my patients. The idea of becoming healthier is really empowering a lot to my patients. So maybe they quit smoking, lose a few pounds, eat more vegetables, get more sleep. Just to be generally healthier makes a huge difference in having a higher pregnancy success rate, she says. I think hopefully today they're teaching that in med school, but it's definitely not something I learned. Another really great example of why the medical industry in the United States is trash. Still, Chen has little, like that is just shocking to me. Like, a doctor really won't be like, wow, you're really like overweight, you're really unhealthy. That's probably having to do with the fact that you're having trouble conceiving. A doctor won't even say that. A doctor won't even know that. A doctor isn't even taught that. Jesus. Still, Chen has little hesitation about using all the tools at her disposal. The treatments we do are very, very low risk. It's true. When I see a couple with unexplained fertility, I say everything looks fine, you can keep trying, or here are the options. But she adds, what people don't realize is there are costs to waiting, to doing nothing. That's a lot of data showing that the stress of infertility is just as high as the stress of having cancer or death of a loved one. People are suffering. They have a tremendous amount of stress and anxiety and divorce and lost days from work. When it comes to doing nothing or doing something, we in the United States are not only a culture of doing something, we're a culture of doing more. As Chen shows me around her clinic across the street from Garisi's lab, she points out the 5 ultrasound rooms where patients preparing for IVF will come and take their bottoms off and get a reader on their follicles. We do more monitoring here than in any other country, she says. 3 visuals the first week, then almost every day the second week up until the eggs are extracted, even though in Europe they may only get scanned once a week. Why? Number 1, patients want to be monitored, says Chen. They're taking multiple injections, going through a surgical procedure. They like the hands-on approach. Chen also mentions revenue, referring to the fee-for-service system that incentivizes more billable procedures, but she also believes that close watching results in better outcomes. The typical IVF cycle requires a tightly orchestrated sequence of medications. The patient is given what's called a gonadotropin-releasing hormone, GnRH, analog, which signals the hypothalamus to stop signaling the pituitary. That prevents premature ovulation and allows us to control the cycle and receive more eggs, says Chen. The next step is to stimulate the ovaries with gonadotropins, follicle-stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone, and monitor the developing follicles to determine the optimal moment for the trigger shot of human chorionic gonadotropin for egg retrieval. If you're not adjusting the medications or not starting the medications when you should, then you might have to cancel the cycle, says Chen. The assisted reproductive cycle is a huge physical, emotional, and often financial investment, but the return isn't that great. The CDC compiled data from nearly 500 clinics and reported that in 2015, just 23% of 186,000 cycles with non-donor eggs resulted in a live birth. With donor eggs, the success rate was 39%. That's an incomplete number because it doesn't account for the treatments and IUI. So for every successful IVF ICSI birth, there are 2 or 3 unsuccessful transfers conferring an unknown amount of risk. Another limitation is that the number is an average across a population of patients. One woman could become pregnant and carry that pregnancy to term after 1 cycle, while another could only do so after 6 cycles, and another could go through several cycles or several miscarriages and call it quits. Miriam Zoll, author of the memoir Cracked Open, went through 3 unsuccessful cycles, including a miscarriage. A friend of hers went through 18. Both wound up adopting. In this field, we're very good at making babies, Chen tells me, but we're very bad at answering questions of why. Okay, I'm going to stop there today, and we're going to talk about what I just read. Okay, I'm against reproductive technology, assisted reproductive technology. I call it forced reproductive technology because that's exactly what it is. And any sane human being who actually wants to become a parent would, 1, want to have a birth at home because that's the safest way to give birth, and 2, actually be conscious and spiritually connected to their partner and the possibility of becoming a parent, and 3, would not want man-made technology to force them pregnant. All of these technologies she just listed are forcing someone pregnant. They're forcing a woman pregnant. It's not like, just because it's technology, just because it's a technological advance doesn't mean that it's good. And for that matter, the vibe I was getting, I didn't even get this vibe when I was reading it, just me personally on my own, but as I was reading it out loud, these idiots at the fucking clinic, what were their names? Chin and Garisi, they're like so hot for artificially creating life. Like they're so into it. It's fascinating to them. And I understand that, you know, that's how science works. It creates this, you know, fascination factor that people are just like, "Oh my gosh, like I can create life. I can genetically modify. I can forcibly and artificially fertilize an egg in a lab. How cool." Yeah, okay, you know what? Sure, that's cool. Why don't you fucking do it in a different, like, you like doing it for like fish or doing it for rats is one thing. How is it forced? Boo boo. How is it not forced? Are you actually like asking me that question? It's forced. It's fake. It's made up. Someone had to make up this technology in order for it to happen. It's forced because you have to hand over your eggs. You have to have your eggs extracted. A man has to hand his semen physically to another person. How is that not forced? It's forced. The medical industry forces it by creating the technology to begin with. Duh. It's forced because it's artificial. If it's artificial, then it's not real. Yeah, they decided to go through the process because it existed. And if it didn't exist, then they couldn't do it, could they? Anyway, that was gross to me. The fact, okay, there's a lot of data showing that the stress of infertility is just as high as the stress of having cancer or a death of a loved one. Wow. Like, chill out. Not being able to have a kid naturally, or you think you're not able to have a kid naturally, is not as serious as someone in your life dying, nor is it as serious as cancer. Okay? Those are two completely different things. And the fact that people like lose their shit over something that simple is mind blowing to me. You should want to conceive naturally, and if you don't want to conceive naturally, I can't really help you. I'm honestly really fucking disgusted that so many gay couples are prostituting women. I'm also they're prostituting women by surrogacy. I'm disgusted that surrogacy exists, period. And all these like lesbian couples who are having semen inserted into them aren't lesbian. You're not a lesbian if you put semen into you. I'm not sorry. Like, how are you a lesbian if you put semen in you? How are you a lesbian if you're like, gosh, I really want to be pregnant. I'm going to go to a lab and have semen forcibly inserted inside me. You're not a lesbian. What are y'all saying? Are y'all saying anything interesting? Oh, okay. Assisted reproductive technology mimics or obviates many of these mechanisms. Millions of sperm are collected, washed with a synthetic mucus-like compound, and filtered. In IVF, the sperm that make the cut, ideally more than 1,000, are matured in a special medium, mimicking capacitation. All of it is mimicking. It's mimicking. It's mimicking nature. It's copying nature. It's forging nature, honestly. It is the commodification of nature. It's the commodification of baby making. Like, and this part was really gross. She was saying how Chen also mentions the revenue, referring to the fee-for-service system that incentivizes more billable procedures. I wrote 3 fucking money signs there because this is all entirely money driven. They want people to pay money to maybe have a kid. And all that stuff about kids having possible real life consequences of being biopsied and losing 1/60th of their egg. That was really scary to me. I know of this woman who had a child artificially, and her kid is like younger than 3 now, but he's already had to have an eye surgery because of how fucked up his vision was. He was also premature. Like, if you're not fit to produce a child, and I've noticed that actually, that women who do have forced pregnancies, forced reproductive technology pregnancies, are more likely to have premature birth than if you actually saw a midwife. It's entirely possible that you could avoid a premature birth because midwives are knowledgeable in that kind of thing, but people in the medical industry aren't. But also it's sometimes not possible because the thing that people don't fucking realize, I hope she talks about this later. I'm farther in the book, but she hasn't talked about it yet. A premature birth is your body's absolute last attempt to abort mission. It's saying, get it out of you. This is not going to work. Make it go bye-bye. You're the priority. We're going to prioritize you. Let's go. You know? It's not people, and then I always hear doctors being like, oh, we don't know why premature birth happens. It's like, well, we can actually fucking look to nature. We can look when animals give birth prematurely. They do so and they leave the baby to die. It's not like they could take care of it to begin with, because it wouldn't. Sometimes they can survive with human intervention, but then they're with human intervention. There are these 2 videos you can watch. There are these 2 videos you can watch about a premature sheep, maybe it was a goat, and a premature llama, where they were both in like farm settings, and with human intervention, the animals were able to live and they're able to, be all right, but like they can't be with other, I think maybe it was an alpaca or a llama, I don't remember. They can't fit in with other animals of their own species because they don't know how. Because they're never going to learn how, because they weren't fully gestated, so their neurodevelopment is just not there. They're never going to be able to fit in with other animals. They're never going to be able to like really properly be a llama or an alpaca or really properly be a sheep or a goat, whatever it was, I forgot, because they're not there. And I'm saying, like, And that's also why the mom abandons it, because she knows that it's better for it to, that her body was intending for it to die. Pretty simple. Just because I want kids doesn't make me less of a lesbian. Personally, I'm going to adopt, but you're being ignorant right now. No. I mean, why would you adopt though? Don't you want to invest in the lesbian community? Lesbians having kids really, really killed lesbian culture. There used to be lesbian businesses, there used to be lesbian neighborhoods, there used to be lesbian bars, there used to be all kinds of lesbian things because, when you don't have kids, you're able to invest more in your community. And we don't have those things anymore because so many lesbians had kids. Leah, you're advocating for animal torture and abuse on an industrial scale by advocating for meat eating. The meat industry is also extremely artificial and, in fact, primarily exploitative of females. Well, sweetheart, I'm fucking different from a female chicken, and your veg brain is making you stupid enough to say shit like that. To compare me to a chicken, how dare you? That's misogyny. That's gross. And that's also not what we're talking about. How typically vegan of you to not be able to understand the subject matter, not be able to stay on topic. Okay, I think IVF is eugenics. You're right, Leah. Yep, that's it, Kay. That's it, Kay Windrix. It's eugenics. It's you're manipulating nature so severely that it's not nature. You're forcing technology to create life, right? And that's forged. It's artificial. And having a child is not a human right. Being able to either birth a child as a woman or adopt a child or what have you, that's not a human right. A child is not a commodity. And when it comes to things like IVF, if you can pay enough, you can have a kid, making a child or a baby or even a fetus a commodity. And that's disgusting and wrong. What did you say, Kay Windrix? To create ideal humans for certain classes of people. Yep. Patenting DNA. That's what I just said. Yep, indeed. Indeed. Thanks, Ozan. Trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to say about this chapter. Why don't we stay on topic, idiots? That was one point I made, not the whole point of this reading. All of this was sounded like such a headache, didn't it? Hold on, let me just read that again. I don't know if I can get to it. Oh, that whole the need for okay, the end of sex. Her point is that theoretically the screening technology will reduce the risk of miscarriage and birth defects. Greeley argues that technology is already here. If we can do that, why would you take those risks? Then sex becomes sort of a Russian roulette. Okay. This, of course, presumes so many things. For one, that miscarriage is worse than ideal than IVF, neither of which I've ever heard any woman call a picnic. In order for the embryologist to have eggs to work with, these eggs need to be harvested from a human who must take ovary-stimulating hormone injections for weeks prior, travel to the clinic for multiple transvaginal ultrasounds to check on progress, and then return to have a needle threaded through her vagina into her ovary under anesthetics to extract eggs from each follicle. Then another visit for embryo insertion, more hormones, and waiting in hopes of a pregnancy, and not another cycle. That sounds like such a fucking headache. I don't want to do that shit. Fuck that, dude. That would be horrible. Having to go through all that headache just to possibly have a child, and you're not even guaranteed one. Gross. the thing about a lot of like infertility, I don't know if she's going to talk about this later, but like there's this phenomenon that happens very frequently where a couple is having sex, they want to have a kid, they're not having a kid, they think they're infertile, and then they go out and adopt a kid. And then very shortly after they actually have custody of a child, the woman becomes pregnant. And that's because there's so much stress about them not having a kid, and then they have a kid, they adopt a kid, and then the stress is gone, and then they're able to become pregnant naturally. Like that says a lot about human behavior and they how we perceive stress and how the body responds to stress for that matter. Okay? So when that is going on and we know that that's going on and that's a documented phenomenon, like maybe you could just like let if you want a kid that badly, you should be able to deal with the consequence of possibly not having one. Like that's the adult thing to do. The adult thing to do is to accept reality and say, maybe it's not for me, tough shit. And that's fine. You can be a nanny. You can donate tons of money to like charities for kids, or you can pay your friends' kids' college tuition. You can do other things with your life other than have kids. And the fact that people force this shit in such a way is really scary to me. I also don't really care about lesbian culture. I'm going to live my life how I want. Yeah, I want to embrace how I am, but I shouldn't have to deny myself of my wants. If you don't really care about lesbian culture, I don't really think you're a lesbian. Hi, MJ. So great to see you. Anahaseo. Who is Sean Ranklin? That sounds really familiar. I'm scrolling back up in your comments. A Chan says, gotta hop onto a meeting for work right now, but thank you for doing this. Forced reproductive technology is the most important under-discussed topic of feminism. Can't wait to replay this. Neki Rama, I hope you were able to knit. That sounds awesome. Medical industry be like, let's give it to women and children first and then worry about the consequences later. Money sign face. Yep, that's exactly what's going on. Okay. I guess I will be doing part 4 later on. Thanks for showing up, everyone. This was fun. We will do this again soon. Bye.